Good morning, everybody. I'm Brad Hubbard Nelson, member of ConcordCAN steering group, and it's great to see you all. I think we're going to have a really interesting discussion this morning and about a topic that we all care about. ConcordCAN is a chapter of Massachusetts Climate Action Network, which is a statewide organization promoting sustainability in communities and also statewide. And we appreciate your being here, and we invite you, if you want to become more involved with ConcordCAN, we actually can use some help in the steering committee. We have a website we maintain, newsletter, events, stuff like that. I'm hoping that we're going to have events soon where we actually see people's faces rather than little squares on a screen. I don't know how many people want to put a thumbs up for that idea, but hopefully we're going to get there before too long. Before I turn it over to Scott, who's going to moderate it, I'm going to share a screen right here. We're talking about a subject which is of interest to everybody, and we thought it would be interesting because it kind of confronts our sustainability principles, which the town adopted a number of years ago. ConcordCAN, as a group, played a role in adopting those sustainability principles, I believe. And there's 4 of them, and we sometimes have a video about them. You probably know them by heart. Now, they all apply in things we're talking about, but the last 2, reducing encroachment upon nature and meeting human needs fairly and efficiently, are interesting because they can not always be black and white. They can come up against each other, and that it poses challenges, and we can find solutions maybe that satisfy all of them. That's the very best situation. We're talking about a place that is very special to us. We feel at home here. I wanted to start this with a land acknowledgement, remembering that we are not the first people here. We want to acknowledge that this event and the places we're talking about are taking place on occupied land. In Concord, we are on Massachusetts, Nipmuc, and Pawtucket Pennacook land. And we should acknowledge this history and ongoing colonization, where we are sitting right now and around this country, and acknowledge that our own story, our own place in the story of this colonization. Thank you for that. Now I need to stop sharing. Native Americans, of course, played a role in shaping the Great Meadows and the places that were around. We are being stewards of this. We shall think about what we should best do. Let me pass it on to Scott Richardson, who is our moderator this morning. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm excited to be moderating this conversation. We're writing 2 articles that are coming into town meeting this spring. As a resident, as someone who believes in the town meeting process, and as someone who has brought articles to town meeting myself, I want to thank Phil and Mark for joining us today, and for their commitment to the process, and for all of the work that it takes to bring something to town meeting. Town meeting is an atom or a molecule or an organ, something like that, in the body politic of democracy. And that's something we all benefit from, regardless of how the outcome of any one vote. So Phil and Mark, on behalf of Team Democracy, thank you very, very much for being here today. We don't take it for granted, and we look at the developments around the world, and we are so fortunate to have people like you who bring things to town meeting. And let's also remember during the question and answer portion that we want to listen generously. We want to speak to be understood and speak to understand. And let's all remember that civil conversation and respect for differing opinions are essential to a functioning democracy and to an informative, meaningful meeting. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Phil, who's going to present his article for town meeting. Phil, the floor is yours. Phil, you can hear me? You can unmute. You might need, Brad, can you allow Phil to unmute? Yeah, bear with us, Phil. Brad, you're muted.
Okay, thank you.
There you go. Great. Thanks, Phil.
Sorry, having some technical difficulties this morning. Thank you, everybody, for attending this morning. And some of you have heard me speak already on this. I have a little bit of an updated slideshow, which I'm going to present in a couple of seconds. And I wanted to thank Jack McBride for helping me out on this. I also wanted to introduce myself to those folks who don't know me. I live on Lawsbrook Road. I am a member of the Transportation Committee, but I'm not speaking on behalf of that committee. I'm speaking on behalf of myself tonight, this morning, excuse me. Also, by way of background, I lived for quite a number of years in Wakefield, north of the city. And in Wakefield, I served that town for 9 years as a conservation commissioner. In my service as a conservation commissioner, I actually got interested in developing a rail trail connection from Wakefield Center through Linfield and then up to Newburyport. A large portion of that trail, but not in Wakefield, is actually developed, and it's relevant to our conversation today. Let me try to share the screen here. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. Can you help me out with that, Brad?
That should be fixed.
Okay. Thanks. All right, so just bear with me for 1 second. Can folks see this?
Not yet.
Let's try it again. Any luck?
No, you've selected the screen and then said share.
Yep.
Okay.
Let's try it like this. I'm going to get rid of that window. I'm going to get rid of this window. Get rid of that. Try bringing it up again.
This is our new ConcordCAN Zoom account, and I hope I have it set up correctly.
How about that?
We just see you and a couple of kayakers.
Okay. So it's not working. What I'm going to do is just try to speak extemporaneously, because there's no point in trying to deal with this.
Well, okay.
So here's let me try to
hold on just a second. Hey, Phil, Are you in a situation where you could make your slides available to Brad and he could walk through them? You could present them?
Sure.
Brad, are you in a position where you could receive a file quickly from Phil and he could,
Sure.
could we draw that?
Yep.
Okay. Just bear with everyone for a second. Have some coffee, relax. Phil, if you can get your slides to Brad, that would be great.
Okay.
This is where you'd be enjoying one of those fine deviled eggs if you were at the physical part of the meeting.
Okay, hold on one second. Bear with me. That's not going to work. It's a 12,000 megabyte file.
Right, okay, then let's go with what you said, which is you just walk us through it. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
So I apologize, folks. I know folks have been used to seeing slides and they have pictures and bullets and diagrams and all kinds of good stuff. And what I'm going to do is try to give you the flavor of what the warrant article petition is all about and why I think it's important. For those of you who are not familiar with the Reformatory Branch Trail, the Reformatory Branch is the path of the former B&M railroad line, which ran originally from Cambridge to Bedford, and then was extended in 1893 to Concord, and then later on from Concord to what was then known as the Concord Reformatory, and is now known as MCI Concord. That train line carried passengers and freight back and forth from the Reformatory to Cambridge. And if anybody has walked on the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, there's a great historical sign. You can see the prison in the background if you're taking a look at it, and it describes what people did in those days. They came out to Concord to visit folks who were at the Reformatory, and also to deliver freight and coal, because coal was the source of fuel not only for the Concord Reformatory, but it was also the source of fuel for Concord's power station. The power station is now where Concord's planning and various boards meet off of Caius Road. That old building was a power plant. It was a coal-fired power plant for many years. The railroad line ran until the 1930s out to the Concord Reformatory, and there was a hurricane that destroyed a couple of bridges. One of the bridges went over the Assabet River. The other bridge went over the Sudbury River, cutting off that access. But the train continued to run to Concord until approximately 1962. In 1962, the railroad abandoned the line from Bedford to Concord. And in 1978 and 79, the railroad abandoned service from Cambridge. And I think many of us remember it was a very interesting time. The Alewife station was proposed. There was a proposal to put in additional mass transit in the line, and a suggestion was made that instead of putting in mass transit, a bicycle path would be put in, and eventually the Minuteman Rail Trail was created. Fast forward to the present, the Minuteman Rail Trail runs from Alewife Station to Bedford Center. Folks who have been there have probably seen the silver rail car. That was what's called a budliner. The budliner was actually in a way of moving railroad trains all the way out to Bedford along that line. One of the reasons why I believe that this article is timely is that the town of Bedford and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts are just about ready to commence construction on an extension of the Minuteman Rail Trail. If you inquire of the town of Bedford, know that there is a town meeting in a couple of weeks. The town is going to determine whether or not it will spend some additional funds to make payment for their portion of the rail trail. I can tell you that there was a town election in Bedford this past weekend, and the select board members who support the rail trail were reelected by large majorities. I certainly can't say what will happen in a town meeting in Bedford, but I know that the town and the state anticipate that the project will move forward. According to the communications that I've received from the state representatives from MassDOT, construction will commence on that project next year, 2023. In light of that, it seemed to me to be prudent that the town begin investigation of how it would react to having a rail trail, which would extend from Cambridge to just past Route 62, and whether or not some planning made sense, whether it was prudent, given the fact that more people would be coming out along the rail trail. And that was what stimulated my original thinking about this. The proposal itself does not call for a construction project. It doesn't call for a spade of earth to be changed. However, it calls for planning, and it includes a financing component, because what I've discovered in examining both this particular project and having experience with a project in Wakefield and other projects around the state is that projects where multi-use paths are proposed are controversial. People are very passionate about the idea. And in order to have a public process where people can communicate in a way where facts are put on the table, where there's some expertise present to answer people's questions, and where I think reasonable decisions and policy can be made, need to be facilitated by folks who are able to help the process. In some of the meetings that I've attended, people have suggested that the development of this idea is dangerous. They've suggested that wildlife hasn't been considered. They've suggested that there's going to be environmental destruction. They've suggested that there's going to be lots of congestion. And in fact, all of those issues, in my mind, are appropriate issues for the conversation. We need to understand what the impact of having any change to this line is going to be. But a process that only relies on rumor and innuendo, or information that's derived from biased sources, or information that's incomplete, isn't going to help us make reasonable decisions about what to do, that's the sine qua non. That's the reason for having a funding component for this idea.
Phil, can I?
So what's the idea? What's the point? Why do I think it's a good idea? And I'm sorry it's taken me a little while to get to this point. All of us who are on the call today, I think, have some idea that we are facing an existential threat to our way of life from climate change. If folks are unclear about that, I will recommend that you look at sources much wiser than me. but I'm going to assume that climate change is real for purposes of this discussion. There are lots of things that can be done about this on the international stage. However, here we go.
I have a, would you like me to go to a slide in this slide?
Sure.
Okay.
Why don't we go to the second slide and then the third slide?
Okay, second slide is this.
Okay, thank you.
Phil, sorry, you have about 5 more minutes, okay?
Yep. So here's where the Reformatory Branch Trail is located. It's a straight line, pretty much. You can see it running from the Bedford line to Lowell Road. Can you go to the next slide, please?
Yep. That's the next.
Okay. This is the text of the warrant article. And can you go to the next slide, please?
Oh.
Okay, we can stop right here. So what's the gist of the article? The article requests money to conduct a feasibility study. The idea of the process, and this is, it says specifically that the money is to conduct a series of public forums so that members of the public, the citizens, the committees, the departments, the abutters, environmental groups, other stakeholders will have an opportunity to participate in the discussion of this idea. Presumably during the course of those discussions, alternative solutions, mitigation measures, et cetera, will be compiled and can be prepared in a report. And at that point in time, suggestions can be made for action. So let me ask you to move to the next slide. Continue to the next slide. Continue to the next slide. Here we go. Why is a feasibility study appropriate and timely? As I said, a rail trail is going to be built to just past Route 62. Construction is going to commence in 2023. The reason that having rail trails in the first place is that they are consistent, not only as recreational resources, but for addressing the Commonwealth's carbon reduction goals. Folks, I know it might seem amazing or unusual, but we live in a car culture. Folks drive their cars to get to work. They drive their cars to get to school. They drive to get their cars to go shopping. It wasn't always that way, and it doesn't have to be that way. Throughout the Commonwealth, throughout the country, and throughout the world, people are using alternatives to carbon-based vehicles in order to do their daily business. In order for folks to feel safe and comfortable to use bicycles or other means of mobility, having places like multi-path, multi-use trails, rail trails, other types of paths are helpful in encouraging people to get out of their cars and use other means of transportation to get from one place to another. Use of multi-use trails as transportation corridors is accepted and has found a home not only in the Commonwealth, but all over the country. Can you go to the next slide, please? These two slides were taken from a report that was prepared by the Commonwealth. On the left side, the Commonwealth has provided some information about the environmental benefits of bicycling versus car trips. And on the right side of the screen, you can see the economic benefits of having a rail trail in a community. All of us who have lived in the town and are aware of what's going on know the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail is going to be completely opened in July. And that means that folks like me will be able to ride their bikes to Trader Joe's and go shopping. People from Acton will be able to come and go to the Neshoba Bakery in West Concord. And I think that we'll find that will be a very popular route.
Phil, I'm going to ask you to take one more minute, okay?
Sure.
Thanks.
I want to sum up by saying that it's been a very interesting process for me. I've appreciated the opportunity to speak. I'm asking you folks to support the article because it is a step in the right direction at the grassroots level for addressing climate change. It's also a step in the right direction for doing what folks in this town have been asking repeatedly for decades. They want safer cycling. And if safer cycling was available to them, they'd consider taking their bikes to get to town. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Phil. And thanks for everyone for bearing with that slide issue there. So now we're going to hear from Mark Gailus. Mark, Brad, if we can let Mark present his screen because he has the next article on the agenda.
Okay, let me see if I can, but anyway, Scott, you want to say anything?
No, I'd like you to see if you can share your screen if you have slides, Mark.
Let me see. I also sent a copy to Brad in case it doesn't work.
Okay.
What does that look like?
There you go. It looks fantastic. Go ahead, Mark. Thanks.
Okay, hold on a second. Slideshow from beginning. Okay, are we seeing it?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about this article. One of the main points is that I want to make is that this is already a supremely great example of a multi-use trail that doesn't need any total makeover. And it has very many special characteristics that I think a lot of people appreciate right now. Let me, I'll just read the article because the wording's a little bit, needs to be read slowly. To determine whether the town will recommend, it's an advisory article, not a regulatory zoning change or whatever, it's a recommendation, to the owners of the various portions of the Reformatory Branch Trail in Concord, our section of what's called the Reformatory Branch, and to the individuals and entities and parties responsible for the care of it, that the trail continue to be maintained in an unpaved natural condition for walking, hiking, jogging, dog walking, nature immersion, nature observation, photography, and cycling. And then the second half of the article proposes some simple guidelines, and that any future changes made to drainage, to features affecting individuals with reduced mobility, or to other aspects of the trail be done in a way that causes the least injury possible to existing trees, does not clear-cut trees to make the trail wider, and preserves to the greatest extent possible the existing natural characteristics of the trail. So it's not saying no modifications can be done, but they should be done in such a way that preserves all the kind of what I think is the supreme excellence of this existing multi-use trail, which is its natural character, something very special that you don't find a lot of places. Concord's Reformatory Branch Trail is a gem of a trail, and it is in endangered species habitat area. It's currently enjoyed by many, many people, including many cyclists who prefer the experience of a natural trail, and by cyclists who use it to commute. There are some recent threats I see to the survival of this exemplar of a mixed-use natural trail, and this article would just allow the town to reaffirm its commitment to protect it. Right now, Concord's Reformatory Branch Trail is maintained by the Concord Trails Committee and the Trail Stewards with assistance from the Division of Natural Resources and the Department of Public Works. A trail, for people who are not very familiar with it, a trail guide and trail map prepared by Division of Natural Resources can be found on the town website. You can see here that the trail at the lower end of that lower left end of the map, what you're looking at is sort of a little triangular area where Monument Street and Lowell Road kind of branch off, and the trail actually extends crossing Monument Street and over to Lowell Road in its existing form. Now, what is kind of motivating this? Well, one of the things that's motivating my concern is that Bedford plans to use most of its portion to construct a 12-foot wide asphalt paved bikeway extension, which will also include 3-foot wide gravel portions on either side in places where the slope of the land permits for hikers and joggers to also use the trail. Bedford's paving plans stop about 800 feet short of the Concord line to loop back to a sidewalk in Bedford. Their paving plans do not quite reach Great Meadows National Wildlife Refuge. And there are individuals in Concord, obviously, that want Concord to follow Bedford's lead. There's a lack of local information, experience, and I would say values present in some of the outside-in approach to looking at what ought to be the future of this trail. The Metropolitan Area Planning Council has something called the trail map, which you can search, that labels different regional trails and kind of indicates way things can be connected. However, it uses this inaccurate left picture, unimproved paths. You can turn different paths on and off for this trail, and instead of the much more appropriate natural surface footway indication, which is available on that map. So there are no rails, there are no ties. It's one of the most walkable trails in town of all of our trails. There are important, I mean, in terms of saving the planet, my belief is that an important element of that is contact with nature and the awareness and appreciation it gives us of natural systems. Experts dive down into various aspects of things, and that's very important, and we keep learning more and more about what's important. But contact with nature, I feel, is a very important part of being an environmentalist. Immersion in nature also provides mental and physical health benefits. You can look this up. You search for nature immersion. You get things from NIH, from Yale, other places. Now, this trail and its future has been considered before. There, in 1995, a very extensive bikeways task force report was prepared, and you can search and find it on the town website. They looked at all trails in town. They started with considering this as just this trail as an extension of the Minutemen Bikeway, but they decided they'd look into all other trails. And interestingly enough, this particular trail, they said, the goal should be the reservation of this trail for passive pedestrian use. And this was stated for reasons that are still true. Impact on endangered species habitat, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Great Meadows concerns for capacity at Great Meadows. Now, the red line I've drawn in indicates the rough location of the trail. The actual path varies in significant ways due to human and nature's action over the years. It passes through wooded and wooded lands and wetlands, as well as by farmland. It's quite a experience to walk it. Almost a mile of this trail is in direct contact with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Great Meadows National Wildlife Refuge. You can see the Great Meadows large water impoundment as that large dark green area at the top, just under the meandering Concord River. Most importantly, the trail's embedded in the middle of rare species habitat. All of that light green hatched area is rare species habitat. And the Blanding's turtles actually come up and lay eggs in people's yards. So the areas that show all the lots and things is also habitat extends into there. So these local rare species are in our care in Concord. They're our responsibility. They're our neighbors, so to speak. Another aspect of why it's good not to clear cut and overly widen trails and be careful about trees is that more and more evidence is coming forward that mature trees are very important for carbon sequestration. Often until they're 50, 75 years old, they don't reach their peak rate of absorbing carbon. They pull carbon down into the roots. The leaves and needles falling to the ground enrich the ground. And when the trees die and fall again, they enrich the soil and build up a healthy biome in the soil and captures extensive carbon. You can look up, there's a term called proforestation. It takes decades for young trees to start trapping carbon dioxide in considerable amounts. Proforestation is when we let existing trees grow to their full potential. You cannot replace a large tree practically with enough small trees not to have an immediate loss of ability to absorb more carbon. We just don't have enough land to plant 100 small trees for every large tree that we take down. With regard to our local ecosystems, I think we should follow the principle of first do no harm. If you hire an urban design firm or a consulting, civil engineering firm, they're going to look at primarily engineered solutions and secondarily to how to minimally satisfy what I consider to be our inadequate environmental protection laws. Concord's Reformatory Branch Trail is an exemplar of a mixed-use natural trail. It's multi-use right now. Cyclists use it. Many cyclists like it. This article is advisory. It doesn't say it cannot be groomed or improved. And this article reaffirms the town's commitment to protect and preserve it. In its present state, as you walk it, it teaches us about nature's powers of recovery and renewal. To me, I feel like I'm in a shrine when I'm walking this, and I was walking it yesterday, and another person we encountered, she said, I think many people feel that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Mark, very much for your presentations. We're going to turn it over now to questions for our two town meeting applicants. And so, Brad, how would you like to do this? Would you like people to raise their hands, or should we just put it in the chat? What's the best way for you to think to do this? I think we might want people to ask their questions. We
often have a few minutes of announcements before we start the questions. So I'd first like to invite anybody who has an announcement to raise their hand. And I have an announcement. Maybe I'll start with mine. I wanted to tell everyone about the Sustainable Middlesex annual meeting, which is called the Carbon Countdown of 2022. And it's going to take place on Saturday morning, March 26th, over Zoom at 9:30 in the morning. I'm going to put a link in the chat in a moment. The subject of the meeting is reaching beyond the choir. And so Mike Barrett, our state senator, is going to speak about climate and legislation at the state level. And then we're going to have breakout sessions for 8 or 9 different approaches, strategies that have been developed involving schools, involving coaching, involving lots of interesting things for reaching beyond the choir. So I welcome anybody to attend. It'll be an interesting morning on Saturday, March 26th. Any other announcements? You can raise your hand by hitting the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and raise hand. Pamela Dritt. Let me ask you to unmute. Pamela, you should be able to.
Thanks. I too really love that trail in its natural state and would hate to see it paved like the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail is. But my question is, would we be legally allowed to do that by the various disabilities acts?
Can you save your question so that when everybody else asks questions, we're having announcements right now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Bill Robichaud?
Yes, Bill Robichaud. I'm the 25 Nancy Road. I've been the trail steward for the Reformatory Branch for about 12 years now. And I've got a lot to share about that trail. And what I'm doing is I'm sponsoring a number of walks on the trail, starting.
Bill, hi, Bill. Just 1 second, if I may. Brad, I think you wanted to see if there was anyone else who had announcements, right? Is that correct?
Right.
Okay, great. So Bill, just pause for a second. Janet, I see your hand is up. Is that an announcement or is that a comment or a question on the?
It's an announcement. Has nothing to do with this the topic of the day. I just
wanted to let's have Janet do her announcement, and then if there's anyone else, we'll give them an opportunity, and then we'll come back. Okay, go ahead, Janet.
I just wanted to say that the Sustainability and Energy Committee is going to have a sustainability series starting on April the 27th with Professor Kerry Emanuel giving a presentation on, I'm forgetting the title that he's come up with, but he's a very well-known climate scientist. So it's going to start with that, and then there's going to be a whole lot of other events encompassing electric cars, heat pumps, etc., etc., etc. But there's a whole series of events coming, and sorry, I'm not very well prepared for this announcement.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. So, Brad, now I think we'd like to move to questions, seeing no other announcements.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask that if you have a question, please raise your hand and Brad will give you an opportunity to ask your question. And let's make sure that what we're doing is taking advantage of the fact that we have Phil and Mark here with us now. So if there's questions you have about their presentations, about the content, about their motivations, et cetera, let's use this time we have with them. If there's statements you want to make, that's fine. But really the purpose of this conversation is to make sure everyone on the call is clear about what Phil and Mark are trying to do here. So having said that, let's go to Bill and then we'll go back to Pamela. Okay, so Bill, you're up.
Am I okay? I'm unmuted. Yeah, actually, it is kind of an announcement. It was actually on one of Phil's slides further into his presentation, which he didn't get to. But as trail steward, and I've got a number of years experience, I'm offering trail walks for anybody who's interested. The first one will be tomorrow, Wednesday the 16th from 2 to 4. And then subsequent to that, each Wednesday from 9 to 11. We'll start at the wastewater treatment plant, and probably it's a 4-mile walk, so it'll probably take a couple hours. What my goal here is that it will be an open type meeting. Actually, more. I like people to be completely open in their discussions. So there'll be, I will facilitate it, but I'll promise to be fair and allow all sides to be heard as long as they're civil. There'll be no official minutes or recording. And I just want to caution that members of boards or committees should check other attendees to make sure they don't constitute a quorum. But I like it to just be a free and open discussion. Everybody's invited, pro, con, whatever your interests are. And hopefully we'll have a good civil discussion along the way. And I think we have more in common than we have differences. So I invite everybody to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Pamela, please unmute.
Are there any laws that would require paving of the trail, like the American with Disabilities Act or anything like that? And if there are, how do we get around them to keep it natural?
Pamela, are you asking both Phil and Mark for that? Okay.
Well, also I'd like to know, Phil, are you interested in keeping it natural, or are you interested in paving it?
So to answer your first question, Pamela, the state Mass Department of Transportation has a policy document. The policy document says that the trail surface does not have to be paved, doesn't have to be asphalt. The policy document says that the trail surface should reflect the conditions through which the trail runs. So in a place like the Reformatory Branch, adjacent to the Great Meadows and running down to Monument Street, personally, I think that we should not pave it. It should be a firm surface that would allow accessibility. But you don't have to have an asphalt trail in order for the trail to be accessible.
Is it accessible now?
I'm not an engineer, but I have walked the trail and unfortunately didn't get to see some of the slides. There are portions of the trail that I think are would probably be considered accessible. So the section that's next to where the wildlife sanctuary, if you've walked it a lot, it's pretty high and dry, even after a rainstorm. But as you proceed west past Treatment Plant Road, you get to some pretty muddy spots. There are a number of spots that are fairly steep grade, and there are a number of spots where there's cracked pavement, or if you were in a wheelchair, would really be difficult to navigate. And again, I'm sorry we didn't get to see the whole show, but one of the considerations I think that's important here is that I agree with Mark. I mean, this is a beautiful spot. I've been up and down it many, many times. And I like the way that the trail is. I think it's terrific that we have access to this great resource. But the reality is that someone who has mobility challenges will find that it's not accessible. If you wanted to get down the Reformatory Branch in a wheelchair or had mobility challenges, it's not accessible. And to me, that was one of the issues that could be and should be examined in a feasibility study. So the answer is the Americans with Disabilities Act does not require paving. I don't support paving. That's the brief answer.
Okay, thank you.
Mark, would you like to answer, please?
Yes. Well, I can only put forward some information that I have and I've observed. So depending on the source of funding you go for, you might be required or pressured to go to a higher level of turning it into a paved surface. And asphalt is one sort of artificial paved surface. There are others with, different binders added into soil or gravel or whatever. There are possibilities, depending on the source of the funding, as I understand it, to get exceptions for natural preservation, historic preservation, et cetera. In the Minutemen Park, the trails are not asphalt paved. They don't have the typical little iron strips on either side. And that's because of exception that this federal location got to, keep the historic character. However, if, as Bedford did, if you look into the history in Bedford, there's a lot online. you seek large-scale federal funding administered by Massachusetts Department of Transportation. The fact is that there will be an inevitable push to asphalt pave it. There was a vote at one point in Bedford, I believe, where people kept saying, proponents of the trail in Bedford, of the Minuteman Bikeway Extension Project in Bedford, kept saying, doesn't have to be paved, doesn't have to be paved. And then there was a vote at town meeting where there was a, what I think is a flawed economic analysis saying over 12 years, it's harder to maintain a stone dust trail. On the other hand, they didn't point out that after 12 or 15 years, you have to tear up, dispose of the old asphalt surface and put a new one in. So it's a slippery slope. ADA compliance can be met in different ways. The U.S. Forestry Service has a different requirement of a firm surface. So it's a pretty complicated matter. And as Phil said, quite a bit of the trail, I think, is very good. And there's also, as in the kind of Fairyland area, there is an assessed trail option of having a trail that is not fully ADA compliant, but is been analyzed by experts to alert people who have mobility issues. Okay, here's what you'll encounter.
That would be great.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Phil. We're going to turn it over to Wayne now. Wayne, do you have a question? Unmute yourself, please. You'll need to unmute yourself, Wayne.
I did turn it off.
There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. 2 points of fact. By the way, I'm Wayne Lobb, 223 Elsinore. One is that the entire Reformatory Branch Trail lies within a priority habitat, number 1581. And any significant change to that trail will have to go through the full Massachusetts Endangered Species Act process. This was not true for the Bedford portion or for any part of the Minuteman Commuter Bikeway. That is a much more complex and difficult process and would probably preclude paving anyway. The other point of fact is tiny. There are 2 railroad ties that poke out on the Reformatory Branch right where the deck trail comes in. And that's all I have.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions in the chat. One from Lois Whitney, which asks, how will tree roots be dealt with respect to accessibility? I assume that means if it were improved. I don't know if anybody has an answer for that.
Can I just jump in for just a sec?
Sure.
I think these are really great questions, but in some respects, they're kind of premature because the big picture that we're looking at today is whether or not the town would support starting to examine these issues in the first place. Some of the questions really go down to the nitty-gritties of the exact design or, engineering choices or how you might solve a particular problem. And while I would love to play engineer, and sometimes I do, I'm not a civil engineer and I'm not a planner by trade. I just have some experience with these issues. And I know that they're complex and they require thought. I also know that Massachusetts has a very strong regulatory framework, as does the town of Concord. And one of the stakeholders is the federal government with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So if this project were to proceed over time, and as these things usually do, it takes many, many years to examine the various steps and to decide what choices people make. So I don't want to cut off the conversation, but I can say with some confidence that the choices that we might make today might be supplanted by new ideas or new technologies tomorrow. And I wouldn't want to say, oh, it has to be one way or another, because things might be different in 5 years.
Okay. Now, okay, let's. There was one question that was, what would be the effect of town meeting passing both articles? I don't know who is in it. Maybe that would be a question for the town moderator.
Good morning. Well, one of the articles is advisory, and the other one provides for a feasibility study and funding for it. And I suppose you would end up with a feasibility study that was subject to the advice that was recommended by the advisory article. And I don't actually see any reason why town meeting could not pass both of these articles. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. I have a question from Tanya. Can you
Hi.
do you have a video?
I do. Hi, good morning. I would like to suggest, I'm sorry, it's not really a question, but I would like to suggest that just embarking on this feasibility study itself is predictory and premature in terms of mentions that Mr. Posner has mentioned in his letter to the Trails Committee about state grant, and state grants do favor hard surfacing, asphalt or other. And there are also connections that Mr. Posner has had with state, the MAPC, transportation people who want to make this a bicycle highway. Okay, so anyway, in terms of this meeting's sustainability focus, I would like to express my view that when we consider sustainability, we need to also consider modesty vis-a-vis nature. Therefore, to give some priority to preserving the natural aspects of this trail and working within our town resources and means, and perhaps apply for a conservation grant at some point if the Natural Resources Commission thinks that's appropriate. To keep this trail natural. It is a unique trail for people who like to walk without having to negotiate rough paths.
Thank you. Can you can we allow some responses? I know what you feel.
Thank you. Thank you.
Does Phil, do you have any?
So yeah, I guess I know Tanya has suggested that I have biases, and I'll tell you, I do have biases. One of my biases is that I think that it's important to promote cycling in a safe way throughout the town. I think it's important that folks be able to get around town without having to get in their cars comfortably and safely in ways that encourage them not to turn the key or push the button. I think as a society, we need to be able to face some change. We need to be able to feel comfortable that we can, at the grassroots level, do something about climate change. If we, as a community, can't bring ourselves to even talk or study about change, then I think our children and our grandchildren are going to be upset with us. They're going to be asking, how come you didn't take a step? As I said, my first comment was the idea here isn't to propose a construction project. It's not any particular design, but it is honestly to promote my biases, which are safe cycling, easy ways to get around without getting in your car, and ways to make a place like this, which is absolutely beautiful. I absolutely agree, and I enjoy it the way it is, but making it comfortable and accessible for people who have mobility challenges is something that's important as well.
Brad, may I just add a very brief comment? Yeah, I just want to say that though I certainly support safe biking, I think biking is a small but important part of reducing our carbon emissions. It's healthful and all that. But what I think we need is, as was mentioned by Town Engineer Stephen Ducran last night at the Select Board's transportation focus meeting, we need a town-wide prioritization of where we spend money in order to accomplish all kinds of transportation goals, including safe cycling. We shouldn't be pre-selecting little parts of a network which might lead to other problems.
Fair enough.
Can I respond to that in one way?
I'd like to, Phil, can I suggest, that we hear from other people who might have questions? I want to use the time to get people's questions answered, okay? Thank you. Brad, who's next?
Ellen Quackenbush is next.
Thank you, Ellen. Ellen, please, if you have a question, let's focus
thank
on
you
the
very much.
questions.
Okay, thanks very much for allowing me to speak. I wanted to ask a basic problem, a basic conflict that I see in this discussion. One is the desire to have a bike trail and increase the traffic on the bike trail. And the second is some statements that Brian Windmiller, who's an expert on blanding turtles, has made to the Trail Committee and made in public often. And that is simply that increasing the human traffic, as he says, or this is a quote, or perhaps more significantly, the average velocity of bicycle traffic on the trail poses a significant danger to the population restoration of the blanding turtles. He spent 20 years doing this. And I would like to ask Phil directly, do you believe that one of the answers could be not to allow increase in human traffic or bike traffic along the trail because there's an inherent conflict with the endangered species of the blanding turtles, which I think is an essential sustainability principle in town?
To start at the end, I don't believe that there's an inherent conflict between having a multi-use trail in this area and the endangered species. I believe that it's certainly possible through good design, good planning, and thoughtful approach to creation of something that's a little different, will achieve both objectives, both having a multi-use trail and protecting and probably even enhancing the wildlife habitat. Folks, if you have an opportunity to take a look at the Parker River Wildlife Refuge, which is another refuge which is managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, if you have a chance to go up there or take a look on a map, there's a rail trail, goes right through the Parker River Wildlife Refuge. Parker River is one of many wildlife refuges that are managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which are adjacent to the Interstate I-95 corridor going from Maine to Florida. And there are many multi-use trails in the wildlife refuge. So while I know that folks treasure this, in the bigger picture, the Reformatory Branch is not a unique situation. Issues like this have been tackled many times and tackled successfully.
Sue.
Hi. I have a couple of quick comments and a question. So first, I'm unable to walk on portions of the Reformatory Trail due to some minor mobility issues, but that's not important because I don't use it to get around town. I only use it for my own personal enjoyment, and there are other trails that I can walk on. The overriding question here is how we balance the larger question of climate action against smaller questions of our own personal, local, beautiful natural resources. The Reformatory Trail is a treasure, and in particular, the wildlife refuge is a treasure. But on the other hand, if we protect every single existing wildlife resource, we will not be able to address climate change. And I think I mushed my my comments together, but here is my question. This is to you in particular, Mr. Gailus. You spoke of the carbon loss of taking down mature trees, but can you compare that to the carbon gain of offsetting other trips? Now, or can anyone on this call do so? And I'm guessing your answer is going to be, you don't have those numbers, and that would be exactly a reason to hire a consultant to consider how we would balance our personal joy in our wildlife refuge versus our personal joy in, frankly, staying alive on this planet. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, no, I mean, that's an important question. I don't have those numbers. Those numbers are hard to get, but we already have paved surfaces connecting the areas that this would connect. And there are many other issues with having a trail terminate on Monument Street or Lowell Road, et cetera. So I think your question is a very key one, and that if we had a real overall town arching sustainability discussion, and we hired someone to look at all these issues of tree loss, where large numbers of trees are being cut down for solar installation, et cetera. I think public transportation, if we're really looking about reducing carbon, electric powered public transportation would be significantly more beneficial than spending money on paving for bicycle traffic. There's only so much you can replace. So I think it's good. And once more, with I think some minor improvements without paving this trail and encountering a lot of issues about wildlife protection, it could be a fine, as it is now for many people, a fine transportation route. But that's an important, that is one of the critical choices here. I just don't think that clear cutting and paving is automatically going to give us a big benefit when there are other ways to create that connection.
I'd like to ask a quick question. Based on Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, and I don't know if anybody knows the answer, was there much clear cutting going on, or many mature trees taken down on that rail trail in our town? Does anybody know that?
Pamela's nodding her head. I don't know.
Brad, there is a, if you look at the Bedford plans for the trail, there is a tree removal plan as part of their overall packet of the engineering drawings and such for what Bedford's planning. That's online and available. There's a tree removal plan. It identifies every mature tree that's being taken down as part of Bedford's work.
Okay.
Yeah. If I might,
one could imagine that could be a proxy for the Concord situation.
Yeah, if I might, another aspect of all these balances too is whether you want connections or whether you want fast connections, because federal rules, I believe, for certain types of surfaces, say designed for 15-mile-an-hour cycling, and hard surface is designed for 20-mile-an-hour cycling. And then they say, well, you need at least 6-foot lane each direction, so you need 12-foot, et cetera. So in other words, in terms of reducing carbon by cycling instead of using a gasoline-powered motor vehicle, another angle on this is to say, what if you just cycle slower on a more natural trail rather than try to make a highway?
Okay, Garrett.
Okay, so on that topic, it seems to me that mixing speeds, mixing 20 miles an hour, say 25 miles an hour, and somebody on a tricycle or a turtle in their shell is an inherent risk. But I'm still unclear on what we're. I understand that we're talking about either preserving or studying, but study what? It sounds like essentially we're talking about converting to a commuter system on the trail for bicyclists, and that's a different use, right? It's still mixed use, it's still multi-use, but it's a much. It would be a if it eventuated, it would be a much heavier weight on bicycle commuting, for example, rather than walking or that kind of stuff. So my question is this: Phil, you told us that you're not in favor of paving, but you are in favor of a commuter connection, right? And what other kinds of surfaces would, you must know a lot of examples, what are some other kinds of surfaces other than paving? And would your study disallow paving as an option?
So I think, again, this is kind of getting the cart before the horse. So when you say the study would allow paving as an option, I think all options are on the table. But to give you a flavor of the way the trails have been developed in Massachusetts, there you have the example of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, which is right on West Concord. So you have a sense of what that's like. Another trail that is being developed at this point in time is a part of the Mass Central Rail Trail in Rutland. Mass Central was a railroad line that ran out from Cambridge out to Northampton. The section in Rutland is a stone dust trail. That particular section was supported by grants from the Mass Trails program, which is a program of the Department of Conservation and Recreation, as opposed to Department of Transportation. So if you have a chance to go out to Central Mass, you can see what a trail like that is like. And that, again, point is that that trail was also supported by the Commonwealth and developed using state money. I think the point that has been brought up repeatedly is that somehow or other, the intention of this is to create a high-speed bike lane. That's kind of a loaded phrase. The point of the warrant article is to have a feasibility study to determine what we should do with this resource, which was a transportation corridor for about 130 years. It's not to prescribe anything. If in the range of choices that the town has available to it, the choice is to have a hard packed earth surface, which is graded so that rain runs off of it and it gets dry quickly and it's still accessible for folks, that's great. If the choice is something like the trail that was recently created next to the Walden Pond Reservation, you can take a drive over there today. Walden Pond has sort of a stabilized stone dust surface. So that's the trail that's right next to the road. It runs from where the crosswalk from the parking lot to the pond is, and you can take a look at that. There's traditional stone dust, which is right on Monument Street. So if you have a chance to walk over to the Old Man's, that's the kind of old-fashioned stone dust. And there are issues with stone dust because it's more expensive to maintain, and the stone dust tends to get outside the path. But what I said earlier is today, what I'm proposing is a study. Let the public know what the options are. And there may be options in 5 or 10 years that are available to us, which would completely reproduce what we have today, the kind of packed earth path that's next to the wildlife sanctuary, but would still provide the type of stability and accessibility, which I think is key to making this a trail that can be used by the public.
Thanks.
Comment on that, brief. I ask myself, has there ever been an engineering study that didn't recommend engineering? And one thing leads to another, and there's momentum. And I urge us to consider that. If we start off on a quote path, we may get somewhere we don't want to go, or we might not. Thanks.
Thanks, sir.
Janet Rothwell.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, Janet.
Okay. I think change is inevitable, and it's coming in the form of bicyclists from Bedford and weather. Weather probably will cause erosion. So I'd like to know how erosion is addressed by the Trails Committee. And the other thing is, if there is an increase in the number of bicyclists or walkers from Bedford, how would we go about protecting the Blandings turtles?
I guess that's what the study must address. Phil, do you want to comment? Or
so I'll just reiterate what you just said, Brad. I mean, I think that's the point of having folks study this. Right. You know, I can't say it enough. I'm not proposing a construction project today. I'm proposing that we have folks who have information at their hands provide information to the public so that the public can understand it and then begin to make choices as to what's going to happen. There is an element that Janet makes that I think is worth repeating, and that is we are in a period of history where there's going to be change. When Bedford completes its path in 2024 or 2025, there will be more people coming to the end. I mean, people are going to come down to the end of that path, not because they love Route 62 all that much, but people will be coming to the end of the path because they want to get to Concord. And people have been wanting to get to Concord since 1635. You know, my sense is that it's important for us to start to plan and to start to think about these issues. I'm sorry for talking so much, but I did want to reiterate one thing that Mark said. There was a very interesting discussion at the select board last night. The Transportation Committee made a presentation. There was lots of good commentary about that. I think I actually really agree with Mark. I mean, we really do need to focus on this issue. And it's really hard. Transportation is a really hard issue because it does raise lots of collateral issues. It does bring up a lot of stuff that is not easy to tackle and it's expensive. The reason why I thought to do this now was really at the end of the day, in my mind, the creation of the Bedford path really pushed the issue. For me, it meant we couldn't wait any longer. And that's why doing this particular element of the larger picture seemed to me to be sensible to do now as opposed to wait.
Mark, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think what I think when I hear Janet's question is that would be a very different study about what to do, you know, given changing circumstances. I think that in my experience in industry, a feasibility study has to be for a very clearly specified project, and you look at costs and benefits and decide whether it's feasible. And you don't have a feasibility study to decide whether there's something that you need to make feasible. You have to have a target. So Janet was talking about a specific feasibility. That would be a different study than what Mr. Posner is suggesting, which seems very fuzzy and open-ended.
Brett, just a second, Phil. Garrett, you have your hand raised still. You have a question, or is that just residual? Okay, I'm gonna take that as Garrett has got his hand up just because he enjoys having his hand up. Phil, quick comment from you, then the last question, we'll wrap up. Thanks.
Okay, so that's actually a good segue, and I've had the really fun and difficult opportunity of talking at a lot of these meetings. And one of the things that I heard, and I think Ellen had mentioned this, Ellen Quackenbush had mentioned this, maybe we should do a needs assessment as opposed to a feasibility study. And I thought, okay, well, what's a needs assessment and what's a feasibility study? And that got me thinking about Mark's comment just now as well. So I reached out to the town meeting moderator and I asked Ms. Reese whether or not I could change the text of the proposed warrant article to say that the warrant article would propose to do a needs assessment or a feasibility study or a needs assessment. And she said, that's within the scope, you can make that change. And then I asked her, can I also add the following text, which would be that the needs assessment or feasibility study would consider issues including but not limited to active transportation, wildlife habitat and resource protection, the town's sustainability goals, and access for persons with mobility challenges, and other issues to be determined by the town manager. So what I'm going to advance at the town meeting, and I realize I just read this, but I'll make the text available to everybody, is an amended text, which is to make it clear that a needs assessment, which is a bit different than a feasibility study, but close, and the specific issues that I just rattled off would be the subject of this funded study. So I'll be happy to make that available to everybody through Brad or through Scott, through me. You can get in touch with me directly. I'll send you a red line strikeout version, and that will be available at the town meeting as well.
Okay, thank you.
Brad, we're at 9:23. How do you want to wrap up?
I'd like to wrap up soon.
Okay, great. One thing that's clear for me is I think there's another topic here for one of our future meetings, Brad, which is this overall question of cycling throughout the town. I think that would be a very, very interesting conversation for us to have, given the number of comments about that today and the importance of that, to what Mr. Posner is providing. Tanya, I see your hand up. I see Patty Kane's hand up. Brad, do we want to take those, or are we gonna leave it at that for now?
We can take them if we keep them short. And
okay, we'll go with Patty because we haven't heard from her. Patty, briefly, please.
I'm asking.
We can't.
You'll need to unmute, Patty.
Say we voted for this. Who would then decide if it were a needs or the other? Who, if it's going to be either or, in needs or feasibility, who would, and say we vote for it, who then decides if it's a needs study or a feasibility study?
So, the text of the article says that the town manager is the decision maker. And, the typical process here in town is that the town manager reaches out to their staff, and the staff in turn provides information that's helped or developed by citizens committees. So we have a really good process in town for the town manager to make good decisions, and the text says the town manager is the ultimate decision maker.
Thank you, Phil. And Tanya? You'll need to unmute, Tanya.
Yes, thank you. Yes. I just want to say that to describe the goal as a Minuteman, as a bicycle highway is not really an exaggeration. And I also want to clarify, I have not been suggesting that Mr. Posner is biased. I have rather pointed to documents. Some of them I just put in the chat, which clarifies that the basic, the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Committee co-chairs who were present at that Bedford meeting that I put in the chat were the ones who were suggesting the continuation of the Minuteman Bikeway. And Mr. Posner then took the proposal or the collaboration to the Bedford Committee. So I'm not suggesting or implying or innuendoing anything or anybody. I do not like doing that. And I don't think that the term bicycle highway is inappropriate in the context that the Article 46 has been proposed, despite its otherwise wording. Thank you.
Okay. I see one more comment from Wayne, who's already made a comment, and then let's close it up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to reiterate that the ultimate decision maker will be the state with regard to the Branch Trail, and that's because the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Act will be in full effect. And so the town manager can propose and the town can propose, but the state will ultimately decide. Second small point is Bedford will remove about 50 trees, and it's 2 miles from Railroad Avenue down to the Concord border. Some of those are in the 15-inch to 24-inch range.
Thank you.
So,
okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for participating. Mark and Phil and all of you who took the time to get up here and learn about this. I don't think this is
Thank you.
all totally black and white. It's not a perfect world, but it's great to be able to get together with you all and consider these things and work on them. Thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you next month. We will probably have a meeting about other town meeting articles, which will be coming up because that town meeting is going to be on May 1st, and there's several other sustainability related articles. So look forward to seeing you all then.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.